All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Diane Sears, and I'm with Go for the Greens. I'm one of the co-founders, and I'd like to introduce my fellow co-founder, Cindy Chase. Hi, Cindy.
Hey, thank you, Diane. Appreciate that.
Good, good. So Go for the Greens, for those of you who don't know, we are built on 4 pillars. We help women business owners grow their companies, and that's one green. We teach about sustainability, that's another green. We teach about golf as a business tool, which is really fun. That's our 3rd pillar. And our 4th pillar, a very important one for today, is about helping young women grow into their greatness. So we are all about this mentorship program that we're putting on. That this is our 8th webinar actually in the series. If you haven't seen the others, excuse me, we have some lightning here in my hometown of Orlando, Florida. Anyway, if you if you haven't seen our others, please visit our YouTube channel. So go to YouTube and just search for Go for the Greens and you'll find us. And with that, I'd like to introduce 2 very important people to our mentorship program. First, Bryant Schultz. Can you pop on for a minute? And Billy is in charge of our entire, all of our mentorship programs that we do all over the world. She's the one who has connected us with the Harmony School, which is where our guests are from. Billy, can you say hello? Okay, she's on mute.
Yep. All right.
All right. And then I'd like to introduce Barb Bertolsky. And Barb, if you could pop on for 1 minute. And Barb is in charge of the mentorship program at the Go for the Greens event that happens in September at Walt Disney World. And so with that, I'd like to ask Cindy to tell us a little bit about the event itself at Disney. Cindy, if you can say a couple words.
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot. And always, Barb and Billy, thank you very much for popping on this. This will be, I think, our 6th year for the mentorship program. And Leslie has been there from the very beginning, I believe. She's awesome. For those of you that are on the mentorship call today, we do ask that you take a look at our website, and we are taking applications for our program in September. There is an application process. I'm not going to go in depth on that, but we're trying to figure out how we're going to make this work in a COVID-19 world right now. And but we've got a great team to work with, and Leslie and Jennifer look forward to hearing a lot of this great information. And I'm going to go mute so I can pay attention to the operations. So Diane, thank you very much for saying anything about the great program that we're trying to put together, and I'll see you at the end of this.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our 2 very special guests. One is Jennifer. And Jennifer, how do I say your last name?
Winn, like Winn with the H in front of it.
Jennifer Winn.
Yes.
Okay, and Jennifer is our expert today. And then Leslie. Leslie, put yourself off of mute. Leslie Garcia Medina is our interviewer. So Leslie has been doing interviews for most of our webinar series, and her sidekick is not here today. She's not able to be with us. So I'm going to be Leslie's sidekick and help interview Jen. So with that, Leslie, why don't you introduce yourself and then have your guest introduce herself.
Hi everyone, like Diane said, my name is Leslie Garcia Medina, and I'm a student at Harmony Science Academy in Dallas. I've been working with Go for the Greens for these past couple of months to create these webinars, and we are super thankful that you guys are here today, and we're really excited to see what information you obtain from this session.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and my name's Jennifer Winn, and I had met Leslie through our Suicide Crisis Center Life Squad program. So I am a licensed professional counselor, and I would say I'm comfortable on a lot of topics, and it's nice when I hear expert, because that sounds very important. But I am a counselor. I also am the Teens Can Survive program director at the Suicide Crisis Center. So at our center, our focus is prevention and crisis intervention. So at any point, we want to do more of education while also screening and preventing the high numbers of, loss of kiddos to suicide, those kiddos who are suffering in silence in some way. So we want to be able to kind of get ahead of the game And so working with teens and school systems has been really successful in allowing kids to be comfortable in talking a little more about mental health and especially suicide as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. Leslie, why don't you start with the questions and I'll jump in.
Okay, so today's topic, or something that we're going to be going over, is something that isn't really spoken about as often as it needs to. We're going to be discussing mental health. So I'm going to start with Jen. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what mental health is and why it's so important to pay close attention to it?
Well, mental health has a lot of definitions, right? I think that it's not as straightforward as we would hope it to be. It's basically, mental health is, at some point, it can be very minor or very, where it could impair our everyday life. And so sometimes the minor, those who are struggling with mental health, like more of the minor type symptoms, it's harder for people to see, and sometimes they don't take it as seriously. So mental health is, we hear all about like depression, anxiety, but it's a little more complex than that. And usually what I see it as is, especially those who come seek, let's say, help in some way in form of counseling, it's when whatever that they've been doing to deal with their everyday life was once functional, but is no longer functional anymore. And it's hard for them to reach out to other resources around them. And so they come to a third party person such as us to provide some type of objective viewpoint on the situation. So, mental health is, I think there's some stigma around it because it's hard for us to really see it like physical health. And mental health can be anything from intense sadness to a slight form of sadness, to where it's hard for us to get through just daily life. And it's important because, we all struggle with it because there's a lot of ups and downs. And the more we talk about it, the more that we're comfortable in, for people just to reach out, and not like what I was saying earlier, for those who suffer in silence, is because there's this fear of disclosing these things out of fear of the judgment, let's say. So we want to try to reduce that stigma in some way by having this panel like this, and conversation, a very honest conversation.
Yes, definitely. And I'm going to have to second that there is a stigma around it, whether it be religious reasons or cultural reasons. And that's something I think we've discussed within our meetings, that a lot of the times people are afraid because mental health it's become something that people are afraid of admitting, when they struggle with things like eating disorders, depression, anxiety. A lot of the times they don't want to speak up about it because it means you're not normal or you're looked at different in society. So what are some ways that one could keep our mental health safe while on this lockdown? Or what can we be doing in order to kind of cope with everything that's going on? Right now?
So, back on what you were saying about there's this fear of admitting certain things. So one of the big parts of, let's say, recovery or change is no longer denying our story, because, sometimes mental health is part of our story of who we are as a person and what we struggle with. And the more that when we deny something that defines us, then it doesn't allow us for any type of change or growth, right? So the first part, being able to own that, yes, I am struggling with mental health, so that it'll allow for somebody to change their story and create a more brave new ending. So, that includes, we hear a lot about coping skills as, the usual taking a bubble bath or like reading or doing something that you enjoy. Sometimes we don't always have those resources. So when we think about like self-care, it's not necessarily sitting down and just watching Netflix all day. It's sometimes doing the hard stuff, right? Things that we do have to complete, things that could be somewhat stressful. Because when we're able to complete our everyday tasks, there's this feeling of accomplishment, and it actually allows us to enjoy the moments when we do have time to sit down. And so I would definitely say find something that challenge you as a person in some way, but makes us feel accomplished. And that could mean folding up some laundry that you've had sitting there, or getting up to shower when you haven't showered in a couple of days. Self-care could also be completing all the work that you haven't finished, so that you can enjoy those times when you have downtime. But then also one of the big things is the social support. So, obviously during this lockdown, it's hard to kind of have that physical social interaction. And so now we're mainly like on Zoom calls, right? Or some type of just video call. And although we can see each other, it's just different, and it's not as concrete as being there in person with somebody. And so definitely having to adjust to that and reaching out to social support as being as creative as possible, meaning having like a daily or weekly day or time when you could set up to talk to a friend, or if that means also doing things such as baking or just calling to check in on somebody and give them these baked goods. I think I spent a lot of my time just baking and giving it to people all the whole time. But, you know, there's a sense of feeling like you are, you know, sharing some form of love and giving it to them as well. Also protecting it is, you know, being able to look and really notice who is your social support system, because sometimes we feel stuck when we feel like, oh, well, I can't go and hang out with that specific friend. Like, well, let's look at who else it is that you can at this point talk to, or who's maybe in your home that you could talk to as well. Or maybe building a relationship that once was not as close because we're so busy running around doing things. And now this lockdown is kind of forcing us to kind of be around just family members and people, which allows for closeness. But then also I want to talk about how sometimes, you know, some people's homes are not safe. And so there's been some concerns about that, where they're not able to go and leave their home to escape a little bit, right? And sometimes school can be an escape for some kiddos as well. And so that means like being able to look up different resources and knowing when something is a little bit too hard for you to handle on your own. There's a lot of crisis hotline numbers. There are also mobile crisis units as well. Like the Adapt Mobile Crisis Unit is from Dallas, and they come to your home and do evaluations since you can't leave the home. And they could also do a lot of calls on the phone too to kind of help you with that. So kind of remembering that you're not the only, you're not alone in all this, and that there are a lot of resources on the outside. And so maybe we could provide some form of a list of resources for them too.
I have to say, these are great pieces of advice, even for the adults in our audience, or you know, who watch this video later. Really good pieces of advice. I've spent a lot of time baking myself and catching up with some old friends, but also working very, very hard. And you know, sometimes it's overwhelming.
It is. And sometimes, you know, being pulled away from that consistency of going and, let's say, going to school and stuff. And so what I always suggest is creating some type of consistent schedule the best way you can while you're at home. If that means like 30 minutes of, let's say, rest time in between work, or also knowing that once it's a certain time, shutting down everything and taking that time for like you time some way. Because it could feel a little bit like there's no consistency, right? So we have to kind of force that upon ourselves the best way we can.
Definitely. And going back to when you spoke about speaking up about it, I think for me personally, over the years, I've learned, and this is something that Abe Blackburn taught me at my first conference for Go for the Greens. I remember I was selected to do a panel, and I was very nervous. I think I cried after, because I was just so nervous with everything. And one of the questions was, I believe it was like, why are you different, or what defines you? And I spoke about how my personal convictions, you know, a lot of times I struggle to admit that I was struggling mentally, you know, I since fifth grade, you know, struggling with depression and anxiety. And so something that she told me, and I still have it written on my mirror, is don't be afraid to be yourself, because there's only one of you and you're amazing. So a lot of the times when we're struggling, we tend to forget what our identity truly is. And I mean, me, I have little, like, not, I wouldn't say errors, but I have little things that I need to work on, but focus on the other traits that you have that make you unique and make you different. And so a lot, like I said, I was struggling to admit that I was struggling with that. And because of that, I was also losing my identity. And so we tend to kind of focus on the negatives, and we don't really take time to, like you said, every once in a while, I like to write. And so, you know, you can write out like make your own little chart. Like, okay, I'm good at baking. I'm good at cooking. I'm good at doing this. I'm good at doing that. And so I believe there are a couple of questions. Barb said, how do you feel about meditation?
Okay. Is that a me? Okay, I'll answer that question.
Barb said, how do you feel about meditation?
Okay, so we talk about meditation as a form of kind of like mindfulness, right? And as a fellow person who's always moving around, it's so hard for me to sit still. I remember the first time I did, let's say, yoga is my form of, I guess, what I see as a very typical meditation mindfulness. And the whole time I was just like, I'm kind of bored, and I had to kind of really refocus because we're so busy with being running around. So meditation doesn't necessarily have to be such things as like yoga that could be helpful, but also forms of mindfulness can be done by doing simple things like washing dishes or folding clothes, meaning that it's about being in the present moment and kind of shutting your mind off from what is the future, what you have to do, and also what has already happened. And so I feel like meditation, or let's say mindfulness, is helpful in giving our brain a rest a little bit. In those moments of, let's say, while you're washing dishes, noticing the dishes, the way it sounds, the smell of the soap. And so when we're so focused on what we're doing in the moment, we've come to realize that the things that we were worried about has created a sense of heaviness on us. And then it has resulted in us feeling this inability to kind of have this wholehearted living, right? And being able to remind ourselves that we are, alive and we're here. We have a unique life story and a unique situation. And just like what Leslie was saying, there's no one else like us. Same thing, our life story, no one else can take that from us, and that's unique to you. And so being able to own it, then you're able to kind of find what is it, move closer to more wholehearted living for ourselves. So that was a long, extended answer to that question.
That's a great answer, though, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to tell you guys that when this whole COVID thing started, I noticed that I had done something like 37 hours of this little wooden puzzle. It's actually a puzzle on my phone, but it's these little wood blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And it suddenly occurred to me that that is my version of meditation. So when I wake up in the morning, I like to do that for about 15 minutes while I'm just processing what's my day going to be like. And then at the end of the day, and sometimes if I'm on a really long phone call or something, and I'm having a hard time focusing on what the person's saying, I notice that if I'm doing that, then I'm actually really focused on whatever the person is saying, because I'm doing this mindless puzzle. And that really helps relax me. And it's goofy, but I was thinking I was wasting my time. And then I thought, no, that is kind of like meditation for me.
Yeah. And we talked about how sometimes we'll have different, let's say, reasons why we, let's say, don't have time for self-care, or we feel like, this unimportance of it, right? And so having to prioritize it kind of feels like we're doing nothing. But in the act, there is a lot that you're doing from those moments, and taking a rest and noticing things that are no longer as important as it used to be.
You feel that same way, Leslie? Are you finding yourself doing anything different now in the COVID lockdown?
I feel like I've kept my things the same. I mean, I've been baking a lot more, coming up with new recipes. My mom is not a fan of that. I leave the kitchen a mess. But coming up with great recipes. And I feel like writing, helps me a lot.
Mm-hmm. And, even during this quarantine, it was really hard to adjust. And sometimes we forget our resiliency and able to adjust to a situation when we give it time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what are some other things that you recommend for us to be doing now during this? I mean, obviously we can't go out and shop or anything, and that's a way that a lot of people cope. So what's something we can be doing now while we're doing shelter in place?
If able to, if it means like developing a new skill, being able to, during this time, it allows for a lot of reflection, right? Because there's not a lot of distraction. And so being able to read certain books that really relate to us, or also being able, there's a lot of help that is available through video calls too. So if at some point you're realizing that this is really hard for you, sometimes it tells us something that maybe we do need someone else to talk to, like an outside professional. And so I would definitely be able to, reflect a little bit on what it is that we're going through. Also, like, this is not something you have to do on your own. Being able to, let's say, do some things with, let's say, family members or other friends, learning a new skill together, or taking walks together with safety, obviously. And then also being creative with it. There's a whole list online where it says like thousands different kind of self-care things. And there's something simple like jump rope for this many times, make a fort. And there's different ways to kind of see what relates to you and going down the line, and being able to, if it's hard for you to find something creative, then that's what Google's for. It's my answer for a lot of things sometimes.
True. So Leslie, what's your next question?
So I noticed that, I believe it was Cindy asked, how do you talk to your parents about loneliness? Which leads to our next question. What do we do whenever mental health isn't believed in one's household? I think we spoke briefly about it. So whether it be cultural reasons, religious reasons, or just bad experiences in general.
Okay. We've had a lot of experiences like that at the school system, and then also in our private practice, where some people see mental health as, especially when we talk about for teenagers, they see it as like, oh, just fix them and figure out what to do. But it's very much a family system, right? And if the parent doesn't believe in it, then it makes it a little bit harder, but not impossible. So what I usually suggest is finding any adult that you feel like you could truly trust to really talk to about these struggles. And then maybe being able to somehow, let's say, collaborate with other adults or other people and being able to talk to the parents. I think one of the struggles is that obviously as a kid, it's hard for y'all, because you can't go to an office and say, hey, I want counseling, right? There needs to be some type of parental guardian. And so being able to reach out to your school counselor, or also any type of adults that you feel like you could trust, being able to confide in them every once in a while. And that is hard, because when sometimes parents, there's this fear when they talk about like, oh, you're feeling like that. There's this fear of, has it something to do with me? And so sometimes it's hard for them to really grasp, and we can't really control that much about it. But being able to know that you're able to reach out to other people around you and see if at some point needing some type of extra help outside of it, and just kind of reiterating to your parents how important this is to you.
That makes good sense. Good sense. Yeah, and I think that's why sometimes mentorship programs like ours are really important too, because if you can get into a situation where you are with people you know and you trust, and who are have your best interest at heart, finding a mentor is a really important thing. I don't know if I realized the value of that when I was a kid, but I mean, mentors can be, women, they can be someone who's like an aunt or an uncle. It could be, someone who's just a few grades ahead of you, so having someone who you can trust and turn to is real important.
Yeah.
And how do you suggest we approach someone? I mean, it could be a family member, or after, someone, well, first, what are the signs that one can see when someone is struggling, and how do we approach them without offending someone? Because a lot of people, like we talked about, a lot of people are still afraid to admit it. So how do we approach them without offending them or saying something that they might not like?
Okay. Well, one of the first parts is that hopefully you have a relationship with them in some way, because that's going to help them feel more comfortable in disclosing. And definitely, it's kind of like going around the topic, but talking about at the same time. So what we may notice is something that's out of the ordinary for that person, right? If they feel like they used to be very talkative, but now they're not as much. They're a little more quiet or subdued. Very big changes in behavior, such as sleeping or eating is off, the low energy. They sometimes, when we think about mental health, we have a specific picture of what it looks like like, oh, sadness is someone who's in the corner and doesn't want to talk to anyone. When sometimes, a lot of times we're very good at hiding it, right? We're able to really mask it. And so we have lost some kiddos who was very well known, was very active, was very happy. And so they were very surprised that this person had been struggling with mental health for a while. And so being able to notice what is out of the ordinary for that person, and then also noticing what are some of the things that are out of the ordinary and bringing it up to that person, like coming up to them and asking like, hey, you depressed? Not going to work as well, right? So being able to say, you know, I'm noticing that you're not talking as much. It seems like, you know, you have low energy, and it doesn't look like you're as interested in those usual activities you're usually interested in. And I wanted to come up to you because I was kind of worried about that. So how are you doing? What's going on? And then seeing from there, if that person's comfortable with you, more likely to ask. And so part of some of the things that we do in Life School, I was talking about, like, if we're concerned about someone who is, let's say, suicidal, being able to be very direct about that question, meaning like, hey, I'm noticing all these things. And if you're really worried about it, being very direct and asking, like, have you had thoughts of suicide before? And someone will be very honest with you. And sometimes we're afraid to kind of be so direct about it because, like what Leslie was saying, this fear of offending someone, because there's so much stigma around it. And so there's some feeling of shame around it. But it's all about our approach, how we come up as non-judgmental and empathetic, that someone is more likely to come and disclose to you. So it's the approach, the things that you notice that you can mention, and then asking the right question of, let's say, concerns about suicide at the right time.
I had myself on mute. Go ahead. What do we do after? I mean, after we do encounter them and we find out that they are attempting to harm themselves, you know, what would be our next step there? What would we do?
Okay, so if they are, let's say, a teenager or an adult?
A teenager. Yeah.
Teenager, okay. So if, let's say, on the end of, let's say, a teenager who tells another teenager, right? So as a teenager, what we do is we go to, who is your trusted adult? Or also, actually, who is the other person's trusted adult? So ask them, who is it that they feel very safe with, that they feel that they could talk to? And it needs to be an adult because they will be able to take the important measures that need to be taken. So find out who their trusted adult is. If they feel like they don't have someone, then you go to your trusted adult and talk to them about the concerns and saying, like, okay, I'm concerned about the safety of this person. They're saying that they're suicidal. And so then after that, there are questions such as, okay, you had these thoughts. Do you have a plan on what you're going to do? And are you actually going to carry out this plan? So some of these questions are things you could find online on how to. There are a lot of different websites where you kind of look, like ASPCA. It's a suicide prevention organization. There's a lot of different sites where they'll ask you what questions to ask on the plan, the thought, and then their intent to do it. And then from there, if someone has a plan and they said, yes, I'm going to do it, then letting these adults know that they may need to go and be hospitalized. Because what we call is that when someone has these very serious thoughts, we call them a suicide zone. So when someone's in that zone, they may impulsively do things to hurt themselves at that moment. And when I say impulsive, that means they're not able to logically think about it until someone's outside of that zone. So when they're in that zone, what we need to do is take the measures of removing anything that may be unsafe. That means whatever their plan may be, ask them, what were you planning to use? What were you planning to do? So we take that information and then tell the adults about it so that they can remove those items and then stay with them until, let's say, the authorities can come to see if they need to be hospitalized or not. That's in a drastic measure. Now, if it's just a thought, then being able to talk to a trusted adult and encouraging them to seek professional help and letting that adult let their parents know as well.
That's a good advice, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask a question, if you don't mind, Leslie. there, with all of the everything that's happening, and we have so much access to what's happening in the media, so we can see things like the what happened in Minnesota.
Oh,
Excuse me. And so there's so much happening, with not only with COVID, but now we have some racial tension that's happening,
mm.
and then negative politics and all of that. Do you think that this is more harmful for people, or do you think should people tune out? I hear so many people just say, I don't want to hear the news at all because it's all negative, and I'm not sure that that's completely healthy to just put yourself in a complete bubble all the time. What would be your advice on that?
True that. I would say more limiting it. Meaning, sometimes we watch it all the time and we become a little bit obsessed with it, and we're just trying to assess every single situation. So having those little media breaks, it could be social media, because we see the news on social media as well. It's like we can't escape it. Being able to take that mental break and being able to remind ourselves, like, okay, what is it that I can do within my means? Because part of, some of these social injustices and the things that obviously with everything that's going on, we can't control it. And that's what makes it very hard. And so not only limiting it, but being able to remind ourselves, like, what is it that we are able to do and control for ourselves? And how can we contribute in some way if that's something that you want to do? So part of, let's say, how I was saying, like, oh, well, bake some goods and give it to people. There's something about giving and in some way helping that helps us in healing in some way, and helps us in really processing or dealing with what's going on in the world. And, part of, let's say, the great thing about being in leadership is that being able to start different types of coalitions or even different activities. And you guys have that mindset. I definitely feel like that with Leslie too. She has that mindset to kind of see creative things that we could do. And so I feel like you guys have those resources and those skills, and how that can really help other people and ourselves in feeling like we are contributing in some way.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Leslie, did you want to take the next question?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, how can we begin to start kind of creating that movement within the stigma? What are some things that we can start doing to create awareness for mental health?
Mm-hmm. Some people, let's say if it starts from in the home, right? Like while we are just every day, and it could be starting by reaching out to a friend that has been struggling, or being able to check in on someone. It could be something such as providing some type of positive reassurance for those on social media. If you want to expand it out, it could be kind of like at Harmony, they started a specific mental health group, which allows for a club to just talk about people, just mental health and people, and it creates a different type of environment in the school. So maybe during these times, being able to figure out how can I maybe potentially create a mental health group at my school to really promote the importance of really talking about it. It could also be, let's say, seeing what is it that you're noticing around you. So, being in the world of the teenage world, right? You guys know what is going on and what is it that is missing. What is it that you feel like you would like to have had when it comes to mental health, and running with that as how can I promote that, let's say in my school, right? So like with Harmony and y'all's mental health club, from what you guys have told me, you guys felt like it was something that was very needed and was missing. And so you guys had to create that. So finding what is missing at your school and putting y'all into that specific niche or pocket to make y'all unique and stand out, and being creative with it.
Leslie, could you tell us a little bit about your group and how many people are involved and how it got started?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, like I said, I go to Harmony, and so I feel like our school is very, it's an amazing school. The staff there is very friendly. I feel like we each have our own one-on-one relationship with every teacher, and so it definitely does help. The thing is that there is a lot of pressure with education. I mean, because it is a charter school, you know, there's always that pressure with like keeping up your good grades, tests, you know, competition, stuff like that. And so we didn't have a guidance counselor to begin with. And so a lot of students, like I said, with the pressure, and it's not just our school, in any high school, you know, it's high school now. And so you have to worry about like SAT scores, TSIs. And so we got a couple of students, after we've created Active Minds, we got a couple of students to sign petitions for our guidance counselor. And so I guess that's where we started paying more close attention to Active Minds. And like Jen said, it focuses on general mental health. We talk about anxiety. We've talked about abuse, whether it be like mental abuse, physical abuse. We've talked about depression. We've made posters. We've had 3, I believe, mental health fairs. And what we do is we take, whether it be the gym or the cafeteria, and we set up different stations with coping, like ways we could cope. And so we have like make your own stress ball, a coloring station. We have we create this background with like you are worthy, you are brave, you are smart. Like we write all over the background of the it's like a white sheet kind of thing. And so we have people take pictures there, and so many other stations. And so I think that over the years it's helped a lot, like Jen was saying, you know, because there was that pressure of work, doing good in your education. And so we've definitely seen the difference in students. You know, at the beginning it was kind of awkward because, like Jen said, it was that stigma where people didn't want to talk about, you know, like I'm struggling. And so we had this one really amazing session where everybody asked questions on a piece of paper, and it was all anonymous. Nobody knew where the questions were coming from. And so questions that you thought you needed help in. And people were asking, like, you know, my cousin passed away, and how do I deal with that? Or I'm struggling to love myself. How do I deal with that? And so throughout that session, we kind of just pulled out random questions, and it was like a whole discussion, like we have about 30 something members. And so everybody was just asking questions, like pulling out questions and answering them. And there was a lot of tears, there was a lot of laughter. And so that's good, because people our age, you know, I think we struggle to show our emotions because we're so caught on with like emojis, you know, like laughing face emoji or like a sad face emoji. And so we struggle to actually show our emotions in person. And so that was definitely a very good experience. And I think hopefully we can continue it next year. But yeah, that's a little sum up of what we are and what we do. You know, we focus on breaking that stigma and kind of allowing our high school students to see the importance of speaking up for yourself, of speaking up for what is right, and to not be afraid to admit that we struggle. We're teenagers, we have a mix of emotions, and it's okay to not be okay at times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't know if Diane, you had any questions. I think she froze.
Oh. Some people did freeze. Maybe it's a thunderstorm?
I'm not sure. Or is it my...
Hi, Leslie. I'll jump in a little bit.
Okay.
I had posed a question about any self-help reading materials. Is there anything that I could occupy my time with that would benefit me and get me to be more mindful and just improve my well-being mentally?
Okay. So let's say one of the books I always recommend, especially when, let's say, working with, like, let's say teenagers, right, is anything from Dr. Dan Siegel. A really good one is Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain. So I'll type that out into the
chat.
Yes. And then, okay. And then also, have you guys heard of Brene Brown before?
I have not, no.
Okay. So Brene Brown, any of her books, she also has a Netflix special. So she has a talk on there, but she is very personal. She talks about shame and owning our shame and owning our story, and being able to get comfortable with the things that we are uncomfortable with, and how we have to kind of add this courage or show up to things that are really hard for us. And so Brene Brown is a really good one. What are some other ones, or what are some other ones that you feel like would be self-help books that you're looking for?
I just prefer to find something to read that would possibly, we're all so busy, and you want to find something that can kind of calm your brain and really get you to think about, like you'd said earlier, the positive and not the negative, because we tend to focus on the negative. So, just something I know I read, God, I can't even remember what the name of it was, but it really was just highlighting everything you think that is positive, because if you focus on the positive, you will have a more positive outlook. If you're constantly dwelling in the negative, it just is like a black hole and it sucks you in.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, even I like to say realistic thinking, right? Because it's hard to always be so positive, but definitely the gratitude part is what, like, sometimes we focus so much on a negative and we forgot what are the things that we're grateful for around us, to kind of remind us that there are some things that we have that that we sometimes forget. So being able to have a gratitude journal each day, where you're able to write down, what am I grateful for today and tomorrow, and being able to start your day off with that. There's a lot of different mindfulness apps. I don't know of any on the top of my head, but there's a lot where it could be like 10, 15 minute type of videos each day, especially when you're busy, to really listen to it. Now there's a lot of different audiobooks, so you could do it while you're I guess, driving or doing your everyday type work. But definitely, I think from what I'm hearing from you, Brene Brown would be a really good one. And there's so many different books for different things too, especially when it comes to understanding a little more about like childhood. I would recommend a Facing Codependency. That one's a pretty good one as well. Are there some books that other people have read that have been helpful for y'all?
I can't remember the name of the book that I read, because I read so many darn books, but
I'm
definitely going to look at these couple that you mentioned.
Okay, yes, because Dr. Dan Siegel and Brene Brown are two really top ones that talk about a lot of different things. But definitely there are so many different books out there, and it's kind of finding one that relates to you. And Leslie, did you have one?
Yes, for me, I think I've made it kind of clear. I actually grew up in a Christian household, and so at the beginning it was very difficult for my parents to accept that I was struggling. And so there is this one book, it's called Burned. I believe it's by Suzanne Young, but it's basically a story about a girl who is struggling within her religion, and so she finds a way to speak to her parents about it, and it kind of just gives you tips about what you can be doing, and it doesn't have to be necessarily religious struggles that you're facing. It could always be like just simply being afraid to talk to your parents about what's going on, or maybe not having that role model that someone to step in, to speak to about what you're going through. So I definitely do recommend that book. I also have an app called Motivation, and you set reminders for yourself. There's you can put every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, and then you put a time where you want the reminders to start and a time when you want them to end. And so it kind of sends you quotes or like reminders, it kind of like you are a goddess, or, you're brave, or you're strong, or it'll send me quotes from like Albert Einstein. And so a lot of the times you never know, you need those, you could be having a really bad day, and eventually they just pop up on your screen, and it could be a lifesaver sometimes. So those are two things that I use to kind of keep myself together.
Yeah, those are great ideas. I didn't know about that app. So I'm seeing Audible. Yes, there's a lot of books you could download if you sign up for it. Audible, I guess.com. And then also I'm seeing, what advice do you provide to individuals who are losing family members to COVID and are unable to have family members attend services to provide the traditional source of support? Oh, that's a loaded question. Let's see.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm seeing is That's a really hard one because that's definitely something that is new just recently. I had a coworker recently who had lost someone and was having to kind of figure out how to do a non-traditional type of service. And, sometimes when we talk about grief and what support looks like, it could be very different. And so support could be just being able to not only say, hey, can I do anything for you, but actually doing something without them asking, like providing them food or being able to check in and say, hey, I saw this thing that reminded me of you. Being able to know like that you're there and that you could be, provide some support in some way. And then also, especially when this is a very different type of grief, when you're not able to fully have this closure. So I would recommend, being able to reach out to professional help to kind of talk about things that's kind of hard for family members to also talk about who is also grieving as well. So I definitely say if it's really difficult for you, being able to seek that professional help, but then also provide as much support as you can for not only yourself, but also the family members as well. And there's a sense of community that comes with it when we're all kind of, I think the big theme is that we're all in this together. And so provide some community and reminder that we are all here for each other and that no one is grieving more than the other person. It's that we're all grieving in very different ways. And especially during this COVID, when we talk about, grief, like loss of jobs or loss of stability, loss of consistency, loss of family members during these times, or also women who are giving birth by themselves. So there's different types of grief. And sometimes there is some assumption that we have to be productive during this time. And we don't have to be. We just have to deal with this grief the best way that we can and be there for other people and spread kindness instead of focusing so much on what the media has been focusing on. We have enough of that with them, right? But I hope that answered that question. I know that was a very loaded type of question. And it's really hard because there's a lot to unpeel in that.
Even when people lose family members, not to COVID, to just anything, like our friend today lost her grandfather,
Yeah.
So, we know that they're not all going to be able to go to the funeral, and it's a really hard time. I heard some really good advice not long ago where, people don't know what to say to someone who's going through something like grief or some kind of mental health problem. So instead of saying, well, how are you doing? And having them think, well, that's just an open-ended question. You can say, how are you feeling today? Or what are you doing? How are you doing today? And so just focus on how they're feeling at the moment so they can say, well, today's been an okay day. And I have used this with some friends who are going through losing parents, things like that, even pre-COVID. And they found it very helpful. And then also, instead of just saying, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Well, they're not in a frame of mind where they're going to come up with tasks to delegate to you. So instead, I asked my friend, hey, would it be helpful for you if I made some phone calls for you to let people know what's going on in your family? I'd be happy to do that if you want to kind of talk to me about a list or something. They say, oh, that's so helpful.
Yeah. Or helping clean or being able to do like little tasks, cook a meal.
Kind of watch your kids for you.
Watch your kiddos, yes.
Feed your dog while you're gone, or, offer something specific. And and that's really much easier than asking them to delegate when they're already overwhelmed.
Yeah, definitely.
There is a book. I actually do have a book for this one. It's called Torn Away by Jennifer Brown. And so what this is a story about a girl who there was a tornado in her town. And so they lost everything. She lost her mother and her younger sister. She had no idea who her father was. When she did find her father, he wasn't a parent figure. I mean, he wasn't very good within like society. And so her journey is just all about, her finding her way to her grandparents and how she coped with losing her family member, society crashing, the economy just going down. And so that definitely is a very good book because it kind of sort of relates to what we're facing now, not exactly, but it does speak about, how she deals with being homeless even, finding her way to her grandparents, losing family members. And so that's a very good book. I definitely do recommend it.
All right, well, if does anyone else have any questions from the audience? I think we're going to be wrapping up soon. I just want to thank you guys, Jennifer and Leslie, two such very different types of expertise, but really important expertise on these subjects. And Leslie will be interested to see what happens to the group you helped form in your school when you go, because I'm sure that you've left an incredible legacy at your school. And then also how you carry that forth into college. It'll be interesting to see. Jennifer, do you have any parting words for our audience on how to keep our chins up during this unusual time of life?
Mm-hmm. Well, kind of like I was saying before, being able to, remember that we're all struggling in very different ways. We're all kind of grieving in very different ways, and to kind of choose kindness over judgment, choosing kindness over anger, because it's very easy to get angry during these times. Choosing to take these moments to care for ourselves and also other people as well, and being able to choose in providing support and that positivity to others as well too.
Thank you, Jennifer, for coming and sharing with us. We appreciate you today.
You're welcome.
For your questions and great input. All of us are struggling with some type of isolation because we're connectors and we enjoy seeing our friends and being with people. So
yes,
as a struggle. Do you hear much about that?
Yes, I have. That is one of the big things, because, when we talk about the social support, that is something that a lot of people use to cope. And now we take those things away and we kind of feel like we have nothing else. And so now it's kind of, we're over here trying to search different things that would help us. And that social part is such a big part. And that's why we've seen an increase in just mental health, and then also increase in suicide as well. So it's very difficult times. And even, being a counselor and talking to these clients about, it's going to almost feel a little bit false and a little bit fake in that we're trying to pretend to create a schedule or pretend that everything's fine. And I'm saying that we shouldn't. We're just being real, and that we have to kind of survive the best way we can during these times, and being very creative because it takes a lot of creativity. And then also what I'm noticing is that during these times is forcing us to really evaluate what's going on around us and for ourselves. And also it has put a lot of people in position to where they're able to find strength in themselves. And we're seeing that a lot by everyone helping each other out, creating, let's say, figuring out how to donate food to healthcare workers or masks and things like that. So it at one point can be very difficult because we're hearing all these things on the news, but we forget some of the things that has created strength and uniting a lot of people together too.
Yeah.
No, Jennifer, that's such a great thing, because I've been, I might not be the most mature adult person on this call, but when you think about that old saying where it says, it takes more face muscles to frown than to smile.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that right now it's so much better right now that when we are all kind of in a weird way downtrodden. And whether you be a child or a teenager or an adult, this world is we are all encompassing something that we've never ever could have imagined. But it just right now we need to support each other more than we've ever have. And
Mm-hmm.
just Leslie, for you, again, you always exceed my expectations. Thank you for inviting Jennifer to be on this call, because this call or this webinar, this wouldn't have been made possible for anybody if you had not gotten Jennifer involved. So once again, you stepped into your greatness. You exceeded my expectations. And Jennifer, I personally would love to have you talk again if it was possible.
Yes, that's what I do.
Yeah, well, like I said, this is what we're human beings. We're not perfect beings.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings, not perfect beings. And so we all It doesn't, you know, there is no way to tell when somebody is depressed. There's no way to tell anything like that. You're the person that really recognizes this is why you're a professional. And so I think that everything that you said today was very enlightening. And I just want to, before I sign off here in a minute and let Diane close it out, I want to thank both of you and praise you for your greatness and for your kindness. So Diane, I know you're going to wrap this up, and then we'll talk to everybody next week.
Yes. Thank you, ladies, and thanks everyone for being on the webinar today. We appreciate it. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you.